Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our regularly scheduled Public Safety and Emergency Management Committee. Today's date is Thursday, October 25th. And with me today are Council Members Steve Fletcher, Councilmember Philippe Cunningham, Councilmember Lene Palmisano, and I am the chair of this committee, Councilmember Alondra Cano, and together we are a quorum of this committee and therefore can conduct business. Before us, we have several items on our agenda. Item number one will be a public comment period, which is now regularly a part of our committee meetings. We have the consent items, which are items 2 through 9. And so what we'll do first is take the public comment period before approving the consent agenda. And then we also have, after the consent agenda, 3 discussion items. So for now, we will go ahead and do the, well, are there any questions in the agenda? Looks like we're good. All right, so then we shall go ahead and do our public commentary section here. And so this is typically opened up to anyone in the community who wants to come up and share thoughts, ideas, or suggestions on the work of the Public Safety Committee or topics relating to public safety and emergency management. So if there are people here who wish to speak, you may do so now. There is a sign-in sheet behind the person with the camera. Oh, just kidding. There's a sign-in sheet that our clerk has in her hand, Kelly. So if you're here to speak, you can go ahead and sign up and then join us here at the podium. So if no one is here to speak on that, we can.
That's okay too.
Yep, we can move forward. So we will just go ahead and receive and file the public comment period. So all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. That motion passes. And we will now move on to the consent agenda here, and I will read these items and then take a vote on approving them. So item number 2 is a powers and duties of the fire chief and fire department activities ordinance. And this is going to be setting a public hearing for November 29th to consider an ordinance amending Title 9, Chapter 173 of the Minneapolis Code of Ordinances relating to the fire and police protection, specifically the fire amending provisions related to powers and duties of the fire chief and authorized department activities. Item number 3 is an agreement between the Minneapolis Fire Department and Big Fish Entertainment to record MFD personnel for a television series titled First Responders Live. Number 4 is a training reimbursement from the Minnesota Board of Firefighter Training and Education. Number 5 is a donation of heavy-duty shelters. So it's accepting a donation of heavy-duty shelters from the Department of Defense Firefighter Property Program to the Minneapolis Fire Department. Item 6 is a gift acceptance from New York State, the Division of Criminal Justice Services, for travel and lodging expenses for the Give CAC Symposium in Albany, New York. Item number 7 is a gift acceptance from the Special Olympics of Minnesota for travel and lodging expenses. Number 8 is a 911 director survey, and that is a staff direction that has been worked on with our staff and our council members here. And item number 9 is a contract with Infinity Wireless for two-way radio airtime trunking services. So those are the items in the consent agenda. Are there any questions or comments? I see Council Member Philippe Cunningham on cue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. I just wanted to speak to item number 8 quickly, that it is important that our city employees know that we are looking out for them, that we are watching, that we're supporting them when there are challenges. And so this staff direction, worked in partnership with city staff, is meant to really help strengthen our 911 department, help the employees feel supported, that it's a well operating department. And so this is really meant to be acknowledgement of how important it is for our employees to be happy and thriving in the workplace. So.
Thank you for those comments, Councilmember. And then we have Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to speak briefly to number 5 and just thank Chief Friedel for taking the initiative to acquire these emergency shelters. I don't know if they're going to end up being part of the mix in terms of how we end up designing the navigation center, but I was able to go look at one. He's got it set up at one of our facilities so that we could see it, and I just really appreciate him going out of his way to get these donations in a timely way, in a way that could be part of our planning. So just acknowledging some great work in the fire department. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. So those are the items on our consent agenda today. So if there are no further questions, I will move to accept these items and move them to the full City Council. So all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And those items are approved. We now move to the discussion section of the agenda, and I will note that we have been joined by Councilmember Jeremiah Ellison. So the first discussion item will be a presentation from the Minneapolis Police Department on our third quarter, our 2018 third quarter body-worn cameras and metrics report. So if we can please have the staff come up and begin the presentation. Thank you.
Madam Chair, council members, good afternoon. Commander Chris Granger from the Minneapolis Police Department. The agenda for the presentation today, I'd like to go over the number of recorded videos and show you some department and precinct metrics. Then I'd like to talk about CAD events and body-worn camera activations, again with department and precinct metrics, and then talk about the 3 audits we completed for the quarter, and then our next steps. So this first slide here shows how many body-worn camera videos were recorded for the quarter: 58,000 in July, 55,000 in August, and 52,000 in September. And then what I did is I broke down these numbers by precinct, as you can see here, and then also by videos recorded on the average per day. Okay. These next slides represent a comparison by percentage of the overall or specific CAD events that required activation of a body-worn camera and the individual officers who were equipped with a body-worn camera and responded. The percentage does not include events where an officer was canceled off the event before arriving. These percentages are by month. So the first slide here is the count of the overall CAD events that required camera activation and officers equipped with body-worn cameras. In June, we were at 82%. At the end of September, we're at 84%, so an increase there. And as of October 21st, we're at 85% for our overall activation. And then I broke that also down by precinct as well for our overall CAD activation. You can see the percentages here by month per precinct. All right. Traffic law enforcement and officers equipped with body-worn cameras. In June, we were at 90%. At the end of September, we're at 91%. October 21st at 91%. Slight increase on that one as well. And again, I broke down these numbers by precinct and by month. All right. Suspicious person calls and officers equipped with body-worn cameras. In June, we were at 84%. At the end of September, 86%. And as of October 21st, we're at 87%. A slight increase there as well. And then again, that's broken down by precinct and by month. And then the last metric here is the unknown trouble calls and officers equipped with body-worn cameras. In June, we're at 80%. September, finishing up at 82%. And as of October 21st, we're at 86%. And again, broken down by precinct. Okay. I'd like to talk a little bit now about CAD data and our compliance percentages. In quarter 3, we began using our dashboard, which allows us to view individual BWC usage per CAD incident. Improvements were made to the dashboard, which included adding more CAD information, more evidence.com information, so we could get a clear picture of usage and compare those two data sets. We experimented with the dashboard to vet its accuracy and determine what kind of audits we could do and how long they would take to complete. When reviewing individual incidents, we noticed that some of the CAD information was missing or inaccurate. Some incidents had no arrival time, no call or no call disposition, or no vehicle location data. We also noticed that the officers cleared or were cleared by dispatchers with a disposition that appeared to indicate the officers arrived when they didn't. These inaccuracies in the CAD data occur for a variety of reasons. An officer may forget to announce their arrival on an emergency call given what they have to immediately deal with at the scene, or for a routine call, they just may fail to press the arrival button when they arrive. Or a dispatcher may not catch a squad arriving on the air, or may quickly clear a squad from one call to handle another urgent call without being able to completely enter all the call information. Missing or inaccurate CAD information requires auditors and supervisors to conduct a deeper review of the incident to accurately determine if arrival occurred, to determine whether or not body-worn camera activation was required. The review could include listing the radio traffic, and this is a database patrol supervisors don't currently have access to, reviewing police reports if they were generated, reviewing call incident reports for information that may be contained in the added remarks, or by reviewing Axon data. Another issue we discovered was that officers didn't have the ability to cancel themselves on their squad computers from calls they didn't arrive on. They were dependent on the dispatcher to enter this information for them. In some cases, this resulted in officers using other clearance codes that indicated an arrival in the data, for example, clearing with an assist. Canceled calls are not counted in the data used for determining if body-worn camera activation should have occurred. When there are discrepancies discovered in the CAD data, the information cannot be corrected in the data fields. The only way to correct the CAD record is to add remarks in the call, which cannot be extracted quantitatively. These discrepancies in the CAD data directly impact the compliance percentages generated by the dashboards we're using. The logic used to pull the CAD data into the dashboard and compare it to the Axon data is sound, but because the data is inaccurate or incomplete at the source, it counts the incident in the dashboard as one that should have video when the officer never arrived on the call. We have not found a solution yet to correct for these discrepancies in the dashboard and the compliance percentages it generates. We have determined that the percentages in the dashboard represent the floor of the compliance data, and that deeper analysis in some cases of events with missing or inaccurate CAD data would result in an increase of the officer's compliance percentage generated by the dashboard if corrections could be made. We created a new dashboard to study CAD data, which we are still vetting for accuracy, but preliminary data shows that there were approximately 24,000 calls in Q3, about 16% of the total, with no arrival time, and approximately 8,000 calls with no call disposition, about 5% of the total. In an effort to improve the accuracy of CAD data, the cancel clearance code has been added to squad computers so officers can properly use this code when it applies. A department-wide email was also sent to the officers reminding them of the importance of ensuring their call activity is documented accurately in CAD, and to let them know that the cancel code was added. They were also reminded of the policy that requires them to announce their arrival on calls and that a disposition code must be provided when clearing. I also asked the precinct inspectors to make sure that this was shared at roll calls. And we're also working with MECC to correct these issues as well. Our next item is one of our 3 audits that we did earlier in the quarter. We used July data, and we looked at we did 50 individual officer audits. And when we started looking at the data, we started to notice that there were issues with uploading in a timely manner as required by policy. And also there were issues with categorizing and adding case numbers as well. So we did an audit to address that. These audits were sent to the precincts and the commands, the divisions, if they had folks involved in mid-August. Officers were selected for auditing if they had a high frequency of body-worn camera videos that were missing case numbers and categories, or a high percentage of body-worn camera videos that had 2 or more days between the recorded and upload date. Couple of things we found: the highest number of days between the recording and uploading of a video was 32 days. And also the highest number of BWC videos that didn't have a case number and or category entered was 111 videos. Supervisors were asked to review the audit issues with the officers, have the officers make any necessary corrections, and to remind the officers of what's required to be in compliance in the future. When the audits were completed by the supervisors, auditors reviewed them to ensure the items had been addressed or sent them back for further correction when needed. And that's a standard process that we use for all of our audits. Our case numbers for quarter three, last quarter, the percentage of body-worn camera videos without correctly formatted case numbers was at 4.3%. This quarter, it's at 3.5%. So we're doing really well. Our next audit we conducted was our activation audit. This is the first audit of its kind that we've done so far with the new dashboard. These audits examine whether individual officers were activating their body-worn cameras when required for the calls they responded to. The audit focused on BWC usage data from either July or August of 2018, whichever month indicated the greatest need for improvement. The auditors were directed to select only CAD incidents where the officer was assigned, where an arrival time was present, and where there was no BWC video recording for the incident. The presumption was that most of these calls should have recordings. No additional analysis was conducted at this point by the auditors. This basic methodology was chosen because our goal was to reach as many officers as possible who appeared to need improvement. 165 officers were audited. The audits were sent to the inspectors and commanders of the officers for action on September 25th through the 27th. The audits were sent electronically using a program that makes completing the audit form, as efficient as possible for supervisors. Supervisors assigned to address the audits were directed to review the calls identified in the audits and conduct any additional review or inquiry needed to verify whether or not BWC video was required for each incident. And that could include reviewing 911 call information, evidence.com, or police reports. They were also asked to indicate on the form whether they agreed or disagreed there should have been a recording. If they disagreed, they were required to document the basis for their decision. If the supervisor determined that an officer was not activating their BWC as required by policy, they were required to mentor the officer on what the policy requires and to convey to the officer the expectation that change was needed and that their BWC usage must occur immediately and consistently. Once the form was completed, it was reviewed by the auditors to ensure the assessments made by the supervisors were correct. The auditors would then conduct any deeper analysis of the incident that was necessary, which could include listening to radio transmissions or reviewing vehicle location information. There were 2,570 separate CAD events captured in this audit that didn't have BWC video. These were forwarded to the supervisors. 370 of these events were parking problems that had no BWC present, and 318 of those enforcement action was taken. This issue, I believe, was just an error in an interpretation of what's required by the policy. I believe it's been corrected. I don't think we'll see this anymore. The types of CAD incidents with missing BWC video included suspicious person calls, disturbances, unknown wireless cell phone, theft calls where a report was needed, traffic stops, check the welfare calls, and unknown trouble calls. At this time, 2/3 of these activation audits are still in progress in the precincts. And then our last audit for the quarter, again, we did our random sample of 25 officers. We selected 5 officers randomly from each precinct and did a quality review of 10 of their videos during the quarter. And the criteria was there a full 30-second pre-event recording? Did the activation at the conclusion of the call appear to be appropriate? Was there a proper case number entered? And was there a category entered?
Before we go on, we have a question or a comment from Councilmember Linnae Palmisano.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It was just a couple of slides ago. What do you mean by unknown wireless or cell phone? I'm just curious.
I could be wrong, but my understanding of that call is it's a wireless caller, possibly calling to report crime or some problem.
With an unknown address? With an unknown address?
Yes, that's my understanding of it, yes.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. And the results from the random sample of 25 officers, the number of videos reviewed was 250. No proper case number entered was found in only 3 of the cases, 1%. No category listed, 1. Only 1 case was found. No complete 30-second pre-recording, 11 cases at 4%, which is a decrease from last quarter, but did not appear to be a proper deactivation at the conclusion of the event, or reason was inconclusive. That went up by 2 cases at 5%. Some of the patterns observed, again, there were some videos that had pre-event recordings that were less than 30 seconds. Partial or full camera obstructions from uniforms were observed, or seat belts. And in these cases, these were temporary, and they were not during any kind of situation that was controversial or tense or confrontational. So events with multiple body-worn camera video have consistent deactivation narration, which was good to see. And deactivation occasionally occurred while officers were still on scene at a call that had not been completed. And again, when I spoke to the auditors about what they had observed, this was situations, the best way to describe it was maybe towards the end of a call, they're still dealing with the people on the call, nothing really happening, but they're engaged in conversation. So the camera should be kept on, but it was turned off in a few of those cases. And then lastly, our next steps. Our focus will remain on activation audits for the remainder of Q4. We're going to continue to process and review the remaining first round of activation audits coming back from the precincts. We're also going to conduct additional rounds of activation audits each month for October through December. Our goal is to ensure our group of middle performers in the 71 to 89 percentile that they use their cameras more consistently. Our focus, and we'll be focusing on addressing our group of low performers, anyone at 70% or below that. On October 19th, precinct inspectors and patrol lieutenants were given access for the first time to a body-worn camera usage dashboard that allows them to view the performance of their assigned personnel and address issues proactively. The second thing we're planning is some of our lowest performers will be subjected to intensive supervision. The officer in question will, what that'll look like is the officer in question will meet with their supervisor at the end of each shift for 15 days. The supervisor will verify that each call that requires BWC video has it. If body-worn camera video isn't recorded as required, the officer will have to explain why, and the supervisor will document the reason and the direction the officer was given for improvement. The documentation will be forwarded to the officer's lieutenant for review, and then forwarded to the officer's inspector, commander, and the quality assurance unit, where auditors will verify the accuracy of the supervisor reviews. And then lastly, a work group has been meeting to determine the criteria and process that could be used for referring continued noncompliance folks to the OPCR for action.
Thank you for that thorough presentation. And I'm just going to look around here and see that we have some questions and comments. Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to point out that we're in ever increasing stages of refinement in how we look at and are tracking body camera use with officers. That's a good thing. Even just last quarter 2 report didn't have information on CAD data uses, right? If I'm not mistaken. So I think we just have a new and more refined level of evaluation. I think that overall, some of these things that you mentioned, like on slide 15 and 16, cleaning up CAD data is kind of a whole other ball game. And so I think what you're saying on slide 15, for example, is these are some examples of what could be done to work on it. Is that?
Yeah, some of the things I mentioned are some of the things that we're going to do to try and prove that. But I mean, there's a lot to do, which we'll work with MECC on.
And so, well, that's good and that's important. It seems like there's probably still some things that could be done with supervisor reviews, like you say, and discipline documentation, like you were talking about at the end, that might be more impactful. I'm curious why on the last page you said your focus will remain on activation audits. I'm wondering, does that mean you think that this is maybe why a few and a decreasing few officers don't have good or consistent usage of their body cameras?
It's definitely an area I think we need to focus on before we move on to other phases of what we have planned for auditing. I would like to get our lowest people up, and I would like to get our middle people more consistent, and that's going to improve. It's going to show improvement for us overall. So I think we have 2 months roughly remaining in the quarter. I think our time would be very well spent focusing on that for the quarter.
Okay. On one of your very first slides here, I think it's slide 3, you just have things like the number of videos recorded. It seems like that's gone down. Is there any potential reasons for that, or thoughts that might give some context to that at all?
Not that I'm aware of, but the only thing I would say is, I mean, there's body-worn camera recordings are kind of tied to the CAD data. So as the CAD data goes up, we're going to see, I think, an increase in recordings. And as the CAD data goes down, we're going to see the same thing. In some respects. Outside of that, I don't have an explanation as to why that is.
Thanks.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this report. It's very thorough and very encouraging. I think it makes sense to me that we're never going to quite get to 100%, that auditing against data is only as good as the data is, and obviously there's always going to be some amount of data error in just, processing 50,000 calls in a month, right? So it makes sense to me that there's probably still a little room for improvement, and it looks like you guys have a plan for that, so that's great. One question I had, though, is it looks like overall the first precinct lags about 10% behind the other precincts in their overall percentage of activation. And so I was wondering if you had a theory about why the first precinct is there. I know there are a lot of things that are different about the first precinct with the downtown entertainment district and everything else. There's just things that are different about the rhythm of policing there, but I'm curious if you have a theory about why the first precinct is showing different numbers.
I don't have a theory. I don't know. What I do know is there's definitely need for improvement in that precinct, and we're definitely they're gonna be included in our focus for audits in the next quarter.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commander Granger, on slide 12, I'm curious, what created the sudden uptick of, I guess, video for unknown trouble? Do we know?
I would like to assume that it has something to do with the audits that we're doing. I know that the work that we're doing is being discussed in the precincts, and my hope is that as a result of that, people are, just complying with the policy, and hopefully that's the reason for the increase.
Being more careful. And then on slide number 14, in starting to talk about some of the CAD issues and how it is not a perfect data set. I'm curious, at the end, you talk about officers having been cleared by the dispatcher, but with a disposition that it seemed like the officers arrived when actually they didn't. Do you have a sense? How often does that happen?
Well, we're still studying that. I can tell you from my own personal review and some of the feedback that we've gotten from the supervisors reviewing the audits in the precincts, that I can't tell you how big the problem is. I can tell you that it occurs with some frequency. And so one scenario is, where there may not be an arrival time or disposition that requires you to possibly dig into the radio traffic. And when you do, sometimes I personally discovered that you learn that you can hear on the air that the dispatcher has canceled the squad because the initial responding squad is code for situation under control, but for whatever reason, that information didn't make its way into the data field itself, but it is captured on the recording. But the only way you know that is if you listen to the recording, which is, you can do it, but it takes a considerable amount more time to find the call and then listen to it and make make your discovery from there.
Overall, I'm just so pleased that we have a really deep, detailed report. This is the report we asked for. This is the report we were asking for quarterly reports on a year ago. It's also been about a year that the chief really changed the policy towards the more on. Actually, always on was what it was, I think, in October of last year during all calls. At this point in time, I appreciate that you're sending emails of issues to supervisors, but I just encourage you as we get into the next quarter or into where we are now to really start using a mechanism of some kind of discipline, even if that is coaching in a more formal way. As you look at your options on how we want to look at increasing compliance and how we were a little bit stagnant last quarter and this quarter, I think that's going to be something that is going to push it further and higher up with the compliance that we want. So
Understood.
I encourage that. And that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just had a brief question because I heard you comment on the component of what are the, you have kind of maybe other ideas about the things you would like to audit. You said you're focusing right now on the, was it the language?
Activation.
Activation, thank you, the activation audit. So could you just give us a quick preview of what some other components of the program you might think you might be considering auditing in the future?
Yes, ma'am. So ultimately where I'd like to go with this is I'd like to get the quantitative methods to the point of automation and then shift that direct responsibility to the precincts so they can be proactive. And then our role on the quantitative side of things is to oversee that, to make sure that people who do slip in their performance are addressed at the precincts. But where I'd like to take my auditors is I'd like to do a deeper dive of the content and quality of the recordings themselves, which is the most time-consuming piece of what we do in our auditing effort. And part of getting the precinct inspectors and patrol lieutenants access to a dashboard pushes us in that direction.
Yeah.
Or moves us in that direction.
That's great, thank you. And I would like to encourage our committee to work with you to think about what the success for the program means, because I really appreciate seeing some of these percentages going up, and definitely, I think we should be reaching out to our inspectors if we're seeing some good numbers, just to say that we really, welcome that kind of improvement, and it's really meant to serve our residents better and well, and so that's really what it translates to for me, especially when we're seeing some 90 percentages, on slide 8 and so forth. So if you could maybe talk to us a little bit about what could we consider, as a successful full implementation of the program. I know you and I talked about briefly about whether or not these things should be at 100, and what does that mean? What does that mean for us? And how can we make sure that folks are feeling like they're reaching that goal, instead of just chasing the problem, but really being able to fully provide the services that our residents need by activating their body cameras when we're asking them to do it. So is 100% our success, or what other components that we could consider a success of this kind of effort?
Well, I believe Councilmember Fletcher said it best. I mean, whenever you're dealing with data, there's always going to be a percentage of error. But there may be a way for us to look at the data in a way to sort of figure out what that error rate actually is. And then that would give us a finish line, or the standard that we want, the top standard that we want to reach or strive for. So that's something we're going to be doing in the future as well.
Thank you. So I'm not seeing any more questions on this presentation, and we know we will see you in January.
Yes, ma'am.
So it'll be a regular communication with you here. So I appreciate it, and thank you. So we shall then move to receive and file this report. And all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. That moves forward. We will now invite our second presentation up to the microphone, and we have item number 11 slated as the contract amendment with Hennepin County regarding the Hennepin County Jail. And I will note that before our presenters start this, that Councilmember Cam Gordon has joined us for this portion of the meeting, and he's been here for a while actually. So we were both part of, and our committee was part of the staff direction on May 25th of this year related to the the contract that the city of Minneapolis has with Hennepin County for jail services, and the concerns that we have between the separation of local law enforcement and federal immigration agents. So if we could have our city attorney, Susan Siegel, kick it off. Welcome.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I am standing, and I'm going to try to channel our city coordinator here because she unfortunately is not able to be here. So I am her stand-in. To start out, just understanding the statutory, what state law provides with respect to the jail. In Minnesota statutes, it's 387.11, dictate that sheriffs have charge and custody of the jail. So while the county board is tasked with funding the jail and owns the jail building, the sheriff, the Hennepin County Sheriff, is in control of the jail. We've been in a number of conversations with county board members, as well as I personally have had a conversation with the sheriff. And there is, with the sheriff, there is just a policy disagreement, I will put it that way, when it comes to immigration control and enforcement. The city does have a contract with the county. It's with the county, not with the sheriff, for use of the jail. And it's a pretty perfunctory agreement, and largely it's just a payment agreement is what it's been so far. It's automatically renews every 2 years. With 6 months notice, we can terminate the agreement. The cost of the city contract with the county for use of the jail is $3.7 million over 2 years. I will note I looked up the budget numbers for the adult detention center, the jail, and the 2018 budget for the jail is about little over $39 million. So the city is nowhere as close to paying any significant portion of the jail costs. The county board has taken some actions. In March of this year, the Board of Commissioners passed a resolution directing the county to issue an RFP that would provide legal services for Hennepin County residents facing deportation, particularly those who are being held in custody in the jail, with an amount of $250,000, and they directed that an RFP be issued. Part of that resolution also directed county staff to include with a $25,000 contract value that a protocol be developed for providing foreign-born residents being booked and placed in custody at the county with immigration regarding their immigration rights, and that the money also be used to help implement this protocol, including translating it into multiple languages. As you know, we developed a placard that is now in the back of all MPD squad cars, providing information to individuals. It's both in Spanish and in English here. And I, a while back, had provided the draft language for that to people working on it. And the contract has been entered into by the county with Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid, and effective October 1. So we expect that protocol to be developed, and our understanding is that the sheriff has agreed that that can be posted in the jail. And I think it will include a phone number for assistance with immigration legal advice for persons being detained in the jail. Earlier this year, also, Commissioners Callison and McLaughlin directed staff to develop a policy relating to the conduct of federal immigration authorities in Hennepin County facilities, and was to include provision to the county of notice of the presence of federal agents within county buildings. I will note that I also reached out, I think sometime last fall, maybe a year ago, to the Chief Judge of Hennepin County District Court, as we were increasingly concerned about witnesses being intimidated to appear for criminal cases and the like. And I know that that issue was discussed between our Chief Judge and the Chief Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court. And I think they felt somewhat limited in their authority to restrict, what really are public spaces, courthouse spaces, but we at least made that effort. The next step that's planned is to meet with the sheriff directly, along with Hennepin County, the assistant administrator in charge of public safety at the county, to continue these discussions. But that's the progress that's been made to date. There have been communications, there have been letters. We've made progress. The city alone, it was an outgrowth of the work. I put together a group to make sure we were implementing and improving our processes with respect to UNT visa processes, and we got input from Legal Aid and Minnesota Advocates for Human Rights, and then Michelle Rivero, who's here, helped us finalize the language that's now on the back of Squad. So I wish I had more to report, but it is a work in progress, I will say that. And then I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Chief Halverson.
Madam Chair, Cano, council members, I'm here representing the police department to kind of to give you some perspective or some idea about what we expect our officers to, or how they handle arresting somebody in the jail, and to kind of give you some ideas on what we might see as issues to deal with if we were not able to bring the people we arrest to Hennepin County Jail. So when the officers make a decision to arrest someone, they are usually the ones who transport them, be it mostly mostly two officer squad cars. They will transport the people to jail from whatever precinct they're working at. With a little bit of variance down in the first precinct, because first precinct has a booking ban. Booking ban sometimes goes to calls when officers request them to come pick up arrestees. And then the booking van will take the arrestees and put them in the booking van and transport them down to the Hennepin County Jail. As the officers drive down to the jail, if you're not familiar with the public safety facility, is what it's called over there. The entrance to the jail is on 4th Street, in between 4th Avenue and 5th Avenue South. Officers drive up to the garage door there, hit a button, and then gain access via the deputies inside the jail. Officers then drive the vehicle inside there, take their prisoner out, and it's like a garage area with approximately room for maybe 10 vehicles, 10 squad cars in there. Officers then take their prisoner out of the vehicle, of their squad, or the booking van, and then they give their paperwork, or if they had done the electronic authority to detain, is already down at the jail, paperwork for the booking the arrestees in the Hennepin County Jail. Then they walk the prisoner to a door which is right near their booking facility within that sally port. The sally port is what another name that we call, or that's called in kind of nomenclature for the garage area in there where the squads pull in. Officers then walk to this door, and when they get to the door is open, slid open, and then Hennepin County deputies are there to receive the prisoners, take the prisoners in. At that time, that's when the formal kind of transfer of custody of the prisoner from the police officers goes to the county. The officers stay there in this area until the prisoner is searched. The Hennepin County deputies usually do a very, very thorough search of people that they're booking into the jail, and can take anywhere from a couple minutes up to 10 minutes for the search. Once the search is done, the jail staff then take these people and they put them in the processing room, and our officers are then completed with the paperwork, and they are done with the process, and they then get back to the vehicles and leave the jail. Until then, usually we are not involved with working with anybody or dealing with anybody inside the jail until an investigator will usually go see them. Most people who are recently arrested, and if an investigator needs to speak to them, they will usually go to the public safety facility, because that's where they usually keep most of the prisoners, or I'm sorry, the arrestees who have been just arrested in the last few days. However, there is also a facility that jail still has here in City Hall that houses prisoners, that we will go and speak to arrestees up there if we need to interview them. So the public safety facility over there has 330 beds. So that's their maximum amount they believe they can handle over there. But they also have another 509 beds here, 509 within City Hall. So moving on, I guess some issues we would foresee for us, for the arrestee, for other peoples involved with the arrest, if we were unable to house arrestees here in Hennepin County or at the Hennepin County Jail or Public Safety Facility, is that if we looked around to other jails, for instance, Ramsey County, they have 500 beds. It would be very difficult to work with them to hold our prisoners and to hold their prisoners. They have a fairly decent county that has a lot of cities that bring people in, with the addition of St. Paul that brings in their arrestees. If we had prisoners over at Ramsey, I'm just going to use the Ramsey County as an example. It's closest, it's to maybe the next biggest jail besides Hennepin County. If we had prisoners at Ramsey County, access for family, getting over there to the Ramsey County to see them from Minneapolis may be difficult. Public defender, try to get over there to see them, may also be difficult. So, and just going back to the process when officers arrest someone. So if there's any type of medical issue with a arrestee, they have nurses down in the Sally Port there. They will ask the arrestee questions if they've been injured or if they received any type of injury either during the arrest or just prior to the arrest. If there are any injuries that occur and the nursing staff, medical staff there believe that they need to be seen by a doctor, then the officers are asked to take the prisoner back, and then we will take them to Hennepin County Medical Center, where they will then be seen by a doctor, address the concern, the issue they have, and then receive paperwork from them, and then we'd have to take paperwork back with the arrestee and back to jail. So if we did this in Ramsey County, we would have to work out the decision on whether we come back to Hennepin County to have them seen, or whether we could find a place in Ramsey County, a hospital over there that could work out some type of plan of bringing prisoners there to be seen. Integration of computer management. So what we currently do, what we have a system is we call it the Tiger system. And so when officers have investigated a case, spoke to the arrestee, what they do is they call it Tiger a case to the Hennepin County for possible consideration of charges. And that's done via computer. I'm unsure if Ramsey County has that or what they use for that process. And then probably one of the biggest things would be transportation of the prisoner back to the county. So again, if we had a person over Ramsey County that maybe had to be seen in court for their 48-hour hold after they've been arrested, or for a possible court case, then we'd have to transport them back here from Ramsey County. Currently, the public safety facility, along with the jail that's here in City Hall, they have tunnels that connect to the government center, so they can take the arrestees over to the government center to address any of their concerns during their case or prosecution. And just go along with this again, so we would have to bring them back to Hennepin County to work in the judicial system here, because the arrest would happen here in Hennepin County. We cannot go through Ramsey County through their process through prosecution. And then finally, you know, after adjudication, if arrestee is found guilty of a crime, they may need to be transferred to the workhouse, Hennepin County Workhouse, which is here in Hennepin County. It's in Plymouth, depending on the time that may be given to them for their conviction, or possibly to the Department of Corrections facility. That's what I have. Any questions?
Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much, and thanks for letting me participate in your committee's work today. I do have a couple questions. You talked about the number of beds, and there's apparently 500 beds in City Hall here and another 300 across the street. Do you have any idea on average how many Minneapolis arrestees need to be detained a night? How many beds we need? And maybe how many we're paying the county to provide for us?
Chair Gano and Councilmember Gordon, the best I could do is to give you a guesstimate, and my guesstimate would be approximately, I would say, probably 50%.
Okay. And 50% of the total of 800?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know whether so the county doesn't own this building, neither does the city. We lease space from the building commission, so the county presumably must be leasing space for the beds that they're using from the building commission. I suspect you don't know, but there must be some kind of lease agreement that could be terminated or changed at some point. You don't know if the lease expires at any date or if it's an ongoing agreement?
Yeah, Madam Chair Cano and Councilmember Gordon, I do not have that information. I do not know about that information on the leasing at all, so yeah, I could not speak to that.
Okay, I appreciate that. I don't either. So I had another question maybe for the city attorney could help with too. Could I just keep going a little bit? Thank you, Madam Chair. So I had a conversation with the sheriff. He also sent us all a letter, and he explained the process that he goes through, and he was claiming that a lot of these things he's required to do by law. He talked in his letter about how he asks all the arrestees that come in, where were they born, and that he's required to do that by state law, he implied. And I'm just curious if that's a true requirement that he has to ask everybody that question?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Gordon, it is not a law. There is a rule, a regulation of the State Department of Corrections requiring places of detention to ask the place of birth. So it's not a law, it is a rule. And the reason behind that, though, is not to assist or aid in immigration enforcement. The reason for that being there, and it could be changed, I think. I don't know if there's federal treaty obligations to require that or not. Honestly, I haven't researched that far. But it's for the benefit of the person being detained, so that a consulate, if they are a citizen of another country, but they are being detained in our country, so that their consulate or embassy can be notified. So it's there to benefit the individual, not to benefit our federal immigration enforcement apparatus. And as included on our notice of rights to people, the individual is not required to answer that question.
I can appreciate that, and I don't think the sheriff tells them that before he asks them the question either. And I know we don't require him to ask that in the contract in any way. Also, the other thing that he told me is that he will notify immigration authorities, Homeland Security personnel, about some people, and they also get access to information, I believe, through FBI reporting automatically, even if he doesn't notify, and that they will call and request to find out when somebody's going to be released. And then anytime they request the notification, he provides them with that notification. Is he legally bound, in your opinion, to tell them when he's releasing any arrestees?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Gordon, no, he is not legally bound. That is a policy decision of the sheriff.
And then he also told me that he will give notification, and if it's during the regular work week and the federal officials request it, he will bring the prisoners, the arrestees, when they're being released, to the Sally Port in custody, and he will turn that individual over from the custody of the sheriff right over to ICE in custody, and they will take the person out. So they're technically never even released to their, the way I think that a judge had intended or the court system would have said. If they're released on the weekend, interestingly enough, he said, or late at night, ICE won't sometimes have the personnel to come and pick them up, and so there isn't that exchange. But if they request it, they do the exchange in the tunnel. And obviously, that's not a legal requirement. That's a decision he apparently is making. I mean, if he's not even, I'm assuming, if he's not even required to notify them of the release, he's not required to turn them over to officials.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Gordon, I think that's exactly right, and that is my understanding of his practice, and that's what he outlined to the city in a letter a little over a year ago.
And my last question, I think I know the answer to this one too, is about the process to amend our contract with the sheriff. So we do have a contract with the sheriff. It's just an ongoing contract, and there's a stipulation in there to make an amendment. And in order to make amendment, it's my understanding, all it would take is both parties agreeing on the amendment, and then it would become a new part of the contract. Is that your understanding as well?
Well, Madam Chair and Councilmember Gordon, while it's been a number of years since I took contracts in law school, yes, if you have a meeting of the mind, there are notice provisions, etc. But as I know you all can appreciate, the problem is getting to the agreement here. But you're absolutely right.
So my theory was we could try to come up with something, and we could say for our arrestees, please do X, do not do Y, and see if the sheriff could agree to those things. For example, before you ever ask a question about your country of origin, please inform the Minneapolis arrestee that they do not have to answer this question. And also we could stipulate, please do not notify about the release of any of our arrestees to any federal officials. I don't think that he necessarily would agree, but it might be worth asking the question.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Gordon, we more or less have. I think the first issue will be resolved when this protocol is posted, and so I think that is solved. In getting further changes in terms of providing ICE with access and notification of when individuals are being released, I think that's a tougher issue.
And I'll just note, and I appreciate all the information about Ramsey County, one of the problems here is we're not in a very good negotiating position when we don't have any viable alternatives. There was a time in the city's history where we did have a detention center, and there actually is at least, I believe, one jail in the first precinct. There's a little bit of a detention opportunities in some of the precincts, or at least one. So that would be the other thing we'd have to do is, well, what are our alternatives? Is there another county? I'm also not clear, and I don't know if any of you are, so this could maybe be my last question for now is, does Ramsey County do the same things that Hennepin County Jail does? Do they ask the same questions, or do we know, or Anoka, or any neighboring counties?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Gordon, I think Michelle Rivero may have more information. It may be different, and it obviously can depend on who the sheriff is. With regard to alternatives, not only is it a matter of paying Minneapolis police officers to drive elsewhere if there are available beds, which is a whole nother issue, because I don't imagine the Ramsey County Jail operates with a major vacancy rate and is staffed up and ready to suddenly handle more people. But let's assume we could even solve that issue. So they drop them off there, but that's not the end of it. As I was looking at the sheriff's budget and the Hennepin County budget book, the sheriff's escort detainees to their court hearings, and there are strict time limits, obviously for the first appearance and for any subsequent court hearings for people who are held in custody. And they escort them in the public safety facility. There actually is a special opening in the arraignment courtrooms where they aren't actually in the courtroom. They're sitting in the courtroom through an open window. But the budget book said that in 2017, sheriff's deputies handled 36,000 court security escorts. So if you assume that half of those people may be Minneapolis residents, that's a lot of having sworn law enforcement drive someplace else, pick up a detainee, escort them to court, stay with them while they're in court in Hennepin County. I mean, so it's practically impossible. It's a good idea, but nothing's impossible, but it would be incredibly expensive. It's just the reality of the situation that we're in. And then I'll let Michelle Rivero take over.
Councilmember Gordon, were you done with your questions?
I think so, but I'd appreciate hearing an answer in terms of any knowledge that we might have about if other county jails in the state or elsewhere follow the same kinds of protocols that the Hennepin County Sheriff does, even though they're not required by state law.
Go ahead.
Hello, Madam Chair, Kano, council members. My name is Michelle Rivero. I am with the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs for the City of Minneapolis. I can respond to that question first and then talk about the things that I was planning on addressing today. So I have been in contact with officials with Ramsey County and St. Paul, as well as with individuals with the University of Minnesota Law School, Detainee Rights Clinic, the Binger Center for New Americans. And with regard to detainers, there is information indicating that there are detainers issued through Ramsey County. My understanding is that Ramsey County does not cooperate with ICE. What does that mean? That's a challenging question. They may not cooperate with ICE, but at the same time, ICE issues detainers. And there is information on the second link that I have here from TRAC, which is through Syracuse University, which provides specific information regarding the number of detainers per county. So for Ramsey County, I've not gone beyond Ramsey and Hennepin County, but for Ramsey County, from October 2017 to April 2018, the number of detainers issued by ICE is 70. Let's see, for fiscal year 2017, it's 60 for Ramsey County. So to the extent that Ramsey County is cooperating with ICE and ensuring that those individuals for whom a detainer has been issued are actually apprehended by ICE. I don't have that specific information, but I'm in continuing communication with counterparts in Ramsey County to get more specific information regarding that subject. I can go through what else the other subjects I was planning to address, if that's acceptable to Madam Chair. Thank you. So I'm briefly going to talk about the national and local enforcement trends and changes from the Obama administration to the Trump administration. ICE enforcement and removal operations made a total of 143,470 arrests in fiscal year 2017, which represents a 30% rise from fiscal year 2016. From January 20th, the inauguration, to end of fiscal year of September 30th, 2017, ICE made 110,568 arrests, which represents a 42% increase over 2016. This does represent a significant increase over the tail end of the Obama administration and is in part attributable to a change in enforcement priorities. Towards the end of the Obama administration, there was a priority on individuals who had criminal histories, whereas towards the beginning of the Trump administration, there was an expansion of enforcement priorities to include virtually anyone who is in the United States without authorization. The St. Paul Field Office of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which also encompasses Minneapolis, saw one of the largest increases nationwide in ICE arrests in 2017. A Pew Research Center report dated February 18th, 2018, which is referenced here, indicates that there was a 67% increase in ICE arrests in the St. Paul area in 2017. Another report by TRAC, which is run by Syracuse University, indicates that the largest single component of ICE arrests remains those where non-citizens are picked up from local jails, run by police and county sheriff departments. TRAC compiles detailed statistical information, including information on ICE detainers, the number of detainers, as I indicated, issued for individuals detained in, I did not say this, detained in Hennepin County Jail for fiscal year 2017 is 494, which is more than twice the amounts for fiscal year 2016 and 2017. And from October 2017 to April 2018, the number is 308. So those are detainers that are issued to Hennepin County where Immigration and Customs Enforcement indicates we are interested in this individual. Will you notify us when you're planning on releasing them from custody? As I indicated, I have been in conversation with individuals, including attorneys at the University of Minnesota Law School Detainee Rights Clinic, who represents many individuals who are originally detained in Hennepin County and then are transferred to ICE custody in Sherburne County Jail typically. I am also a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association and have been in touch with the local chapter of the American Immigration Lawyers Association to identify more specifically exactly what is happening in the Hennepin County Jail facility and to identify ways that the city can be responsive. I'm also in contact with the Hennepin County Public Defender's Office for the same purpose, as well as advocacy organizations. And once there is or are suggestions, I am happy to bring those back to council. That concludes my part.
Thank you, Ms. Rivero. I'm looking to see if we have more questions. And Councilmember Gordon, looks like you're ready.
And I don't necessarily have a question. I just have a comment. So it feels to me like we are violating our own separation ordinance, and we're forcing our own, potentially our own police officers to violate our own separation ordinance by taking arrestees to the Hennepin County Jail. And that just, and we may be violating it because that's what we've set up as the only option and the only thing they can do. And that's just frustrating and it's discouraging, and I don't really know what to necessarily do about it. I think having us all arrested and taken over to Hennepin County Jail might not be the answer, but I would like to see us try to come up with some alternatives and what we could do. And I, in good conscience, it's hard for me to just sit still while this is going on. And I noticed you said there were 70 from Ramsey County and over 400 from Hennepin County that have been gone through this, and from what I understand, any of those who were released during regular work hours were handed right over in Hennepin County. So I don't know. It's at least worth expressing that, and hopefully we can start to get some creative ideas about what can we do about this, and how can we approach this, and
Madam Chair, and Councilmember Gordon, that this is a situation that is viewed with urgency by my office as well as by the attorneys I've communicated with, and that we are actively trying to identify strategies to create a solution. Very actively.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Kano. I'm wondering if it's helpful to have statistics on how many detentions are happening in relationship to arrests. I'm wondering if we know what people are being arrested for that's leading to this activity, because it occurs to me that there might be ways, we unfortunately can't do much about a sheriff who won't cooperate with us and who doesn't share our values. We might be able to think about adapting the way we do arrests. So are there particular categories of crime that we could do cite and release rather than arrest, so that we're not exposing people to this, at least until we have a sheriff who will cooperate with us?
Okay.
And maybe permanently, just because we should try to arrest people.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Fletcher, the number of people taken to jail has been greatly reduced. There's been a 53% reduction, I think, just over the last couple of years. There are more, we're, for example, doing pre-charge diversion. We're working hard on reducing arrests for bench warrants. We started this sign and release warrant where people are not taken into jail. So there's a lot of work around that already that we are very committed to continuing.
I do have a question, and we had discussed this issue before this presentation, just to try to get a sense of where we were taking this. And as council members know, this is a topic that comes up frequently in especially immigrant communities and communities of color, and it's oftentimes one that we don't have a clear response to. So it does feel like there's this injustice happening and there's not a lot that the city can do. And so part of contextualizing this presentation is to help us get more information about the current lay of the land. What are the processes that the city of Minneapolis takes into consideration when working with populations that are impacted on this front? What is the role of MPD? What's the role of, as we heard, the county commissioners in relationship to jail space that is operated and run by the sheriff. And so this was an attempt to get more basic foundational information to the council to hopefully do more work on this front. And we're unraveling sort of that ball of yarn to figure out how we're going to get to an answer that can really help our communities who are most vulnerable to ending up in deportation proceedings by having a light out on their car, or not understanding how to follow some traffic rules. The most recent example that was given to me was a long-term employee of a local business and restaurant was sent to Hennepin County Jail on a domestic abuse issue and didn't end up getting charged, but when he was released, ICE agents were waiting for him outside, and so it started the process of his deportation. And so then the employer got involved, and there was all these conversations about it, and I reached out to Ms. Rivero and some others in the city to see if we could find a way to support some of these discussions. And so again, it just raised the importance of that staff direction that we had authorized and supported earlier this year, because we know that right now the intensity towards targeting this population that's impacted has just increased on so many levels. And so many of us who are elected now do believe that cities can do more and should do more to protect our communities. So I think that to Councilmember Fletcher's point, we should explore working with MPD and with the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs and our city attorney's office more details about what is the role that the city plays in, putting certain individuals in specific, I'm going to say harm's way, because it does lead to very disproportionate outcomes for similar, for similar acts that we see in the community, where somebody can, somebody who does something, they end up in a deportation proceeding versus folks who are given a ticket or given a second chance here. So I am curious to know more about how our work through MPD can help mitigate that and bring more clarity to that, and just have a more, I guess, racial equity lens into that conversation as it impacts immigrant populations specifically. So I'm going to be following up with some folks here afterwards, and I hope that, Cam, you and I can continue to work on this, and certainly anyone in our committee who's interested is more than welcome to join that conversation and that work, so we can think about what future action the committee can take on this front. And we know that right now our plate is sort of full with budget and comp plan and municipal ID and a bunch of other work that's coming up. So we can think about what that could be. And in the meantime, I would love to lean on the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs a little bit more to maybe help provide leadership in that conversation, to bring more capacity to researching that issue and looking at it some more, and then engaging our community just to see what this looks like for them, because a lot of times the immigrant rights advocate community will bring these conversations up to us and will say, what are you doing on this issue? How are you helping our community in this way? So I think there's a lot of fertile ground here for us to build on. I do have just sort of one technical question, just in terms of the, I heard there was a letter from our city coordinator that was sent to the county, maybe the county coordinator, so her counterpart there. And I was just curious what that letter was about and what response we got, and if there's a chance that maybe council members could see a copy of that communication, just to see where that discussion was leading.
Madam Chair, yes. A letter was sent over the summer from our city coordinator to the county administrator. And it was sent to the county administrator because the jail contract is a county contract. And I am sure our city coordinator would be happy to share copies of that and to provide it. And it set out the staff direction. I mean, basically, is that we want the measures identified by Councilmember Gordon, as well as other protections.
Thank you. It'd be great to get a copy of that communication. So, Councilmember Gordon, did you have more comments?
I just had one other thought, and I don't know that the committee has to necessarily take this action, but I know that we've talked about amending the contract somewhat informally, but through a staff direction, and then a little more formally in a letter. But there might be a role that the council could play by passing a firm resolution unanimously saying we would like to see these specific things changed in the jail practices and jail contract, and at least then the sheriff could see that, oh, this is the city council and the mayor saying they want these three very specific things, or four or two or whatever we have changed. And hearing this and feeling the urgency of it, that is something that I might consider trying to get up to the council the next round and working with folks on doing that. I know that it won't change the contract, but it would send a message that we would like to change the practices, and maybe they could change without a contract change, or the contract. And it would be more of a formal city action than just the staff direction, which never feels like it has quite the same weight as a resolution.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Gordon, our office would be happy to assist with the wording for that.
Yeah, that sounds like a great next step. Absolutely. Thank you. All right. So we have some homework to do and some more action to take on this in the future, and really talented staff. Thank you for your presentation today. So with no further questions or comments on this, we shall go ahead and receive and file this presentation. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And that moves forward. We now have a final presentation today on the domestic violence. This is the domestic violence annual report from our city attorney's office, and this is item number 12. So we shall give space to our city attorney once more. Thank you,
Madam Chair. I am back. Can somebody help make it full screen? Somebody a little worked up than me. I'm saying, I'm trying. First, I thank you for including this on the agenda. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and it is an area that we have placed a lot of focus on. I know in our office, our health department, the police department, and it's an area that urgently needs more attention, and I know all of you are committed to this. Councilmember Cunningham, I know certainly is as well. But first I want to introduce Brandy Bennett and Tatiana Grant, who are here. They are two of our victim witness service employees who work with us with our domestic violence victims and witnesses, and just do a terrific job, and they're just outstanding. So I want to give credit to the people who do the actual work. So back in 2007, our council took a pledge to improve the city's response, and we have done a lot of work since then in how, and it was really the first time the police department used responding officers to 911 calls to gather information at the scene, which is to help us be able to prosecute cases without the victim, without putting the pressure on the victim to testify necessarily. And we work closely with advocates, with probation, obviously with our police department, and with the courts. And we have a presence down in the Domestic Abuse Service Center, which is staffed both by county attorneys and a city attorney. And I want to give credit also to the police department, because we had this Federal Violence Against Women Act grant to improve our performance on gone on arrival cases. That ended in 2017. And that paid for extra investigator resources for these gone on arrival cases at the Domestic Abuse Service Center. And the police department stepped up and has maintained that position, which has just been really critical to being able to charge more cases. And those are some of the most dangerous cases for victims, are the gone on arrival cases. I am going to turn this over to Jennifer Saunders, who is our manager of our domestic violence team. She's also been the leader in the burn grant at Little Earth, and was really her work that landed the planning grant and then now this implementation grant. So, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and council members, for letting us speak today about the very important work that we do surrounding domestic violence in the city attorney's office and throughout the city. As Susan mentioned, I'm the supervising attorney of our domestic abuse team, which consists of myself, 6 attorneys, 3 wonderful victim witness specialists, and 3 paralegals. And we have several initiatives that we have ongoing, and things that we are looking forward to doing in the future that I will cover today. Going here. One of the main things that we do on an ongoing basis is outreach and training to our various justice partners. Each year we do a criminal justice partners update, which includes probation officers, advocates, and other partners within the criminal justice system about domestic violence issues, new laws, initiatives, and areas of interest. And we always get very good attendance at that and good feedback. This year, in addition, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in a moment, we did specifically training addressing strangulation, which we are realizing is an issue that requires more training in recognition and how to treat these cases appropriately. We also do ongoing training with our law enforcement partners, obviously including Minneapolis Police Department, Metro Transit, State Patrol, doing training not only for their new recruits in their academies, but doing ongoing roll call and in-service trainings. In fact, Mr. Bates, who you'll hear from shortly, and Ms. Bennett, along with Sergeant Melissa Rogers from the Police Department, are doing in-service trainings as we speak, approximately 40 of them total? 26, okay, a lot of training on these issues. And we also have made a very concerted effort to make sure that our employees have the latest information and do send folks to national trainings on innovative practices, which quite frankly is one of those trainings that prompt us to step up our training on strangulation. So these are the conviction rates for the domestic violence cases that my team handles over the last few years. As you can see, right around 2007, 2008, there was a marked increase. That's where we implemented our domestic violence protocol, response protocol for Minneapolis Police Department, where they started gathering much more information on these calls. So we had that information up front. As you may or may not know, on the misdemeanor level cases, what we get on the scene is generally what we get. So we don't have the level of investigation that the felonies do. So we are trying to improve the information that we're getting up front. Obviously, body cams have made a big difference there as well. And therefore, we can more effectively move forward on our cases with better information right from the beginning. So that our conviction rates reflect that. As Susan mentioned, the Domestic Abuse Service Center is where we review all of the gone on arrival cases, where there has been a supported allegation of domestic violence, but the suspect is not present to be arrested. The Domestic Abuse Service Center reviews all of those cases. And these are the charging numbers for the Domestic Abuse Service Center. As you can see, there was a big jump after 2013. That's when we started having more information available and more resources to these offenses. And we are continuing to charge many more cases in the past few years than we had previously. And that includes sometimes, as you can see from the numbers, felony level cases that are discovered as we dig into the backgrounds of the individuals who are suspects in the case. The work at the Domestic Abuse Service Center has also allowed us to greatly reduce the amount of time that it takes to review the case and get the case charged and resolved. So with better resources there, we're able to make those charging decisions much more quickly and get the cases into court more quickly. As anyone who works with domestic violence can tell you, time is not a good thing for domestic violence prosecution. The faster you can get the cases in the system, get them resolved, and hopefully move on to services for the family, the better.
We have one question here. Yes, Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for this information and all of your work. Can you go back to the last slide, please?
Yes.
So I see here with the Violence Against Women Act grant, I just wanted to get some clarification. How does are services and resources still available through that for potentially same-sex male couples as well, or is it specifically just for women-identified people?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Councilmember Cunningham. One of the wonderful things about the Domestic Abuse Service Center is the level of advocacy support there. In fact, there are advocates available at that center for same-sex couples out front. Minnesota is there on a regular basis. There are advocates specializing in East African services, Asian Women United, and African American services. Basically, one of the beauties of that center is that wherever somebody needs to get help, they can be referred to that help immediately. And that's something that's been ongoing at the Domestic Abuse Service Center for quite some time. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on briefly to talk about some of the improvements that we've tried to make in strangulation training and awareness. First of all, I just want to couch this with the information that domestic strangulation is actually a felony level offense, and that was due to a statutory change several years ago. So if there is an allegation of strangulation where there's a family or household member relationship, that actually would be referred to the domestic abuse unit of the Minneapolis Police Department, investigated as a felony level offense, and presented to the county attorneys for possible charges. One of the issues we were finding in reviewing some of our cases that came to us as misdemeanors is there may have been strangulation allegations that weren't followed up on. And one of the reasons for that is because some of the signs and symptoms of strangulation are not very apparent. And there's not as much information about what strangulation looks like. And so we saw an opportunity to increase our training in that area because we are the ones who are training the police officers on a regular basis. So in September of this year, Chris Bates, who is our attorney down at the Domestic Assault Unit, and Kirsten Kim, who is our third victim witness specialist, worked with the Domestic Assault Unit of the MPD to bring in a nationally known trainer. And this was a trainer that they had seen at one of their trainings. He is very well known and respected, Lieutenant Mark Wynn. He was in the Nashville Police Department. So we had that training in September. We had over 100 individuals present. And based on that, we've been able to share a lot of that information, and we also have added some information on strangulation to our protocol training. Now, this is just one slide that gives kind of a fact sheet of some of the types of information we're sharing. Our actual training on this is several slides in our presentation, but this kind of shows you not only the dangerousness of strangulation and the possible lethality, but that in many cases it's a little difficult to determine without some additional digging that may or may not have occurred. So our effort is to try to, because these are responding officers who generally have to make is it going to be a misdemeanor, is it going to be probable cause booking as a felony, call based on the evidence that they're presented, that they have the best information about what to look for if there is a strangulation allegation. So that is one of the things that we have started doing recently. One of our other ongoing projects has been actually, we're in our third year, is the Hotspots home visit pilot. As I'm sure you've been given information on before, we've been working with a protocol to follow up on domestic violence cases that are in some of our violent crime hotspots in North and South Minneapolis. What we had found out through an earlier burn grant was that in those violent crime hotspots, the number one call for service was domestic violence related calls. What we also discovered is that a lot of these addresses have had multiple domestic violence related 911 calls in a relatively short period of time. So what we decided to do by developing this project was to follow up with these households where there was a domestic related call made, but no police report done. And generally, just so you know, the police report, what we found in our data and following up on these calls, is that the reason the police report was not done is that there wasn't a criminal action to report on. But that doesn't mean there weren't issues and there weren't problems at the home. Now, what the team did would follow up with these families where they had made a call that was somehow domestic related, but where there wasn't an arrestable offense and there wasn't a police report done. And that team was a police officer and a family therapist from the Domestic Abuse Project initially. We have brought in other therapists as well. And the team would offer services, provide resources, collect data, and we would use that data just to try to figure out how can we improve services? How can we better address this issue for these families in the community? And we had several goals with the Hotspots project, and you can see the goals up here, but they're mainly surrounded around having better engagement with the community, making sure services are more available, and that people know how to access these services, and that the system itself, the police officers perhaps who are the first response to these calls, knows how to get people hooked up with these appropriate places and where to direct them. So far in our pilot through the first quarter of this year, we've made over 2,200 hotspots visits, and that we actually were able to visit at over 1,600 of the addresses. We got a 41% success rate in making contact with someone at the address, which means basically somebody came to the door. Of the people who came to the door, 78% of them were willing to speak to us, which is great. We've spoken with over 1,000 people under the pilot, and over 60% of those individuals accepted a resource handout during the home visit. And we were able to increase awareness of over 170 persons with how to best locate resources to address their needs, because we would ask them that. Has this helped you? Do you have a better idea now of how you can proceed? And because this is an evolving process, our focus has changed a bit recently on what we're trying to do with these visits. Initially we were trying to get some information. It was a little bit more of a research lens, but now we're really trying to improve our responsiveness and figure out the best way to help increase the safety for these families. At this point, I wanted to bring up one of our therapists, Carrie Crawford, who used to be with Domestic Abuse Project and is now has her own therapy consulting business and has gone on a lot of these visits, just to give you a perspective of what it looks like.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for having me here. My name is Carrie Crockford. I'm in private practice right now, and my area of expertise is working with perpetrators of domestic violence. I have developed a program that's trauma-informed, also meets state statute. Prior to that, I was with Domestic Abuse Project running their perpetrator program. I've been involved with the Hotspots Project since its inception in 2015, working with Michelle Jacobson and developing kind of a protocol for going out onto these visits. So what we've learned in the last 3 years, I won't bog you down with all the time-consuming but fun stories that I could tell you about the evolution of the project. Right now, what we're finding is that there is a desperate need for access within each individual precinct. We are going out in 3, 4, and 5. My specific area is in 4. And in those various precincts, we're finding that communities and neighborhoods even have their own specific needs and their own resource palette that they need to draw from. So the goal right now, we've changed some of our questioning, we've changed some of our approach, and that's to really figure out what exactly they need in place of using 911. The biggest indicator that we're seeing across all 3 precincts is that 911 is used as a diversionary tactic. It's a, come in, make something stop, then go away. And it's the only number that they know. It's an easy number. I mean, we've been learning it since we were little. And it works. And the effectiveness of it seems to be pretty successful. Unfortunately, there is an abuse of that 911 system because the residents are learning that there's certain buzzwords that they can say to get a police response in order to get that diversion out there quicker, which is why we were seeing the reduction in reports being filed, because the officers would arrive on scene expecting to see or find one thing and then something else happens. The other thing that we're finding, because we're going to the visits within 2 weeks to 4 weeks after the original call, is that no matter who we're talking to at the residence, they're indicating other needs in addition to police support. They're talking about their children needing services, there's mental health issues, there's chemical dependency issues. I would be running into gentlemen that were in need of or going through the court process for DV programming. And so we're trying to make sure that we are accumulating all of those needs and figuring out what resources are in the community that they could have access to and creating a warm handoff. It's very difficult to call a 1-800 number and cycle your way through an incredibly large county that has a ton of resources to funnel down into that specific space that you need to be with. Our goal would be to implement a person within the precinct who would be able to have access to the resources that are available to those residents in the precinct, that they could say, here, go call Carrie, go call Bob. This is the person you want to talk to, and I'll help you do that. We've also created orange cards that are similar to the blue cards, only they're resource-based. Right now, the next steps would be translating them into multiple languages. We have a large Somali population over in Southside. We have a Native population in Little Earth that would benefit from having resources that are accessible in that way, and they're able to read and understand those resources as well. Cultural responsiveness is huge, so we're also changing the way that we're asking questions and what questions we're asking where, because we've discovered that there's different questions that need to be asked. That's resulted in our Little Earth advocate who is going out specifically into Little Earth. She's carrying around little grab bags that have toiletry items in them, things like that, diapers, toothpaste, deodorant, stuff like that. So the other big piece of this is reintegrating the police into the community as well, getting them to understand the needs of their residents. So they're doing more motivational interviewing in these situations versus interrogation, which allows them, because they are going back, these are repeat places they're going to be visiting, they'll be back next week. Now they have context for the people that they're serving, they can better do their job. So, where are you? Thank you. Okay, so our next steps for our Hotspots project, we have been having listening sessions within the community to try to help build these alternate responses, listening to the community about what do they need, what are the needs that are not being met. And those include a better toolkit for the officers, some of which Carrie discussed about how to appropriately refer people, looking at integrating better training for the officers, and also having those good referral services. And a lot of those suggestions came out of those listening sessions. And our goal is to try to develop this awareness and this trust of community resources other than 911 to deal with non-criminal issues in the home. So instead of calling 911 when the family is in crisis, they know who to speak to and they know the best place to go for the services that they need. One of the other wonderful things that kind of grew out of this pilot project was the realization that having a person that works with MPD to do some of this community navigation would be very helpful, and the MPD is now posted and is going to work on hiring that individual. So we're very excited about that, to see the continuation of this work on a much broader, more permanent basis, so that we can really offer the best services to these families when they reach out for help. And whoever they reach out to, we want to make sure we get them to the right people. I would like to briefly bring up Christopher Bates, who is our attorney who is embedded down in the domestic assault unit of the Minneapolis Police Department. He's just going to give you an overview of his duties down there.
Madam Chair, council members, thank you for having us today. I've been with the City Attorney's Office for about 5 years now. I've been at the domestic assault team for about 2 years, and I've been down at the DAU for about going on a year now. So I'm down there embedded with the sergeants every day, assisting them with their cases, in every aspect of their cases. Many of the cases they are conducting are felonies. As you all know, many of those felonies may be declined and come to us as misdemeanors or gross misdemeanors. So I'm there working those cases every day with those officers. I have many administrative duties, including maintenance of the felony enhancement list, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit. And I also, as has been indicated, help doing training. Right now, currently, Brandon Bennett and a sergeant from the MPD are training all 900 officers, hour and a half training. We're doing that twice a week, Mondays and Wednesdays, and covering the domestic assault protocol, all 13 points of that, as well as portion on strangulation. As we've indicated, we're very concerned about strangulations, and many of those cases coming back to us as misdemeanors. We like those to be charged as felonies as much as possible. So again, thank you for your support and the work we do.
Yeah, so Chris has just done a terrific job, and he's a great resource to have a prosecutor embedded down in that unit to really help guide their investigations and the work they're doing to get the best results. We also have a paralegal down in that unit, so I think it's an important part of our work with law enforcement. So something else we've done that ties into our work in domestic violence is the work around improving the city's processes around UNT visas, because one of the permitted grounds to be able to apply for a visa to stay in the country is if you've been a victim of a domestic crime. And the police department and the city attorney's office, we were already processing those pretty quickly, but at the end of last year, led by Council Member Glidden, there's an ordinance with some deadlines and providing for an expedited process. And I formed a group that included legal aid, Minnesota advocates. Lieutenant Gio Valise has been assigned to oversee this work in the police department, as well as our office. Jennifer Saunders does that in our office. And we now have these, like, it's easy to find on our website. We each of the department pages, as well as the city page overall, have links on who to contact, how to go about it. Here's the forms. If you have questions, you can call these people, and here's some links to that work. And then Lieutenant Valise organized a training for law enforcement in the region generally, which was very well attended, on when can you certify, because it takes some discretion, there's guidance on it, but we don't want people requests for certification being denied because you're taking too narrow a view of it. And so here's a link to a little video about that training that was organized by Lieutenant Valise. The felony enhancement list, so there are, if you commit certain domestic qualifying misdemeanor, gross misdemeanor crimes, the next one can be enhanced as a felony. We've been manually maintaining this list. What we have been doing for the last couple of years is working with the BCA as they've gotten their new system up and running to try to automate this process. So we've got it maybe about halfway done, but not enough so that we can't do it manually. And the benefit of that is that then it would be statewide. So we will be working with Jean Ranieri and others to try to keep moving that work forward. And we think that's important. So what's ahead for our work? Jennifer has already outlined some of it. I am also committed to working and reaching out to the LGBTQ community, which we haven't done enough of in this work or in our work around sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. So those are both priorities. There also is an assessment that started, but the philosophy for so long has been on punishment: catch, prosecute, punish. As we're trying to evolve in our thinking, particularly with these lower level misdemeanor domestic abuse offenses, where the couple may want to stay together, they just want the violence to stop, of trying to make sure that the best programming, the most effective kinds of programming and culturally specific programming are available, as well as trying out some different models. So we're going to be looking at that more. As Jennifer mentioned, we're doing some community listening sessions. We're working with the Cultural Wellness Center out of North Point, and also intend to reach out to Casa de Esperanza. Pillsbury United runs a program in the Brian Coyle Center, specifically focused on domestic violence within the Somali community, and really reaching out to different groups and seeing what we can do better, what we can do differently, and particularly at the very lowest levels, what can be done to try to intervene early before you've got any kind of a significant criminal case. But I'm just really proud of the work our office has done and will continue to do, and they're just terrific. I'm a very lucky person. And thank you for your patience. If there are any questions, I'm sure that Jennifer or Chris or Carrie will be happy to answer them. Or Tatiana or Brandy.
I'm looking here to see if there's any questions. Councilmember Cunningham.
Excuse me. So I know that there is, from my understanding, there's a domestic violence hotline. Is there such a thing?
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair and Councilmember Cunningham. Yes, as part of the domestic violence protocol response for the officers, one of the points of the protocol is they call a domestic violence hotline. We are currently contracted with the Domestic Abuse Project that they staff that hotline. And they call the hotline, they give pertinent information about the case and contact information for the victim. And the goal then of the hotline is one of the advocates from the Domestic Abuse Project reaches out to that victim within a short period of time to offer services, to try to give, explanation of what's going on. We also have many intersections with the victims and providing that information. We currently have 1.4 advocates from Cornerstone embedded in the domestic assault unit, so they will reach out there mainly focusing on the felony level cases. And then in both our office with our victim witness specialist and the county attorney's office with their similar victim witness staff are in constant contact with victims on cases as they work through the court process, explaining what's going on, getting their input under the victim rights statute, and also making referral services as necessary. But yeah, the current domestic abuse hotline is part of the police protocol, and that's in an effort to make sure that the victims are supported as early as possible in the process. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, I know that in 2010, that the federal government had the Defending Childhood initiative, which was specifically focused on intervening with childhood exposure to violence through domestic violence. And I was just curious, I know that it was called out as an area of more need with children's supports. So I'm just curious about, are there federal initiatives that are currently happening that we would be able to incorporate that in, or state level initiatives that are happening? I'm just curious about what the landscape is now. If we did have something that was so specific to really help support kids, I'm just curious about if there's anything still continuing. I know that was a 3-year program, so.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Councilmember Cunningham. As part of my duties, I do sit on a couple of committees, one of them being the Family Violence Coordinating Council. And one of the purposes of that council is to try and improve services surrounding all issues of domestic violence. Most of the interaction we have with programming is the statutorily required offender programming once they are convicted of the offense. But again, we do make referrals for things that are necessary for the family. And if we have advocacy organizations we can reach out to. I do know that when you're dealing with children exposed to traumatic violence, not only is that an immediate need for those children, but then you have the trauma focus through the rest of their lives. And one of the things that we mentioned as a next initiative is looking at the programming that's available through that lens. And in working with the various organizations that do this programming, I know that that is a very top priority of theirs, to make sure that the programming that they are doing is appropriate. As Susan mentioned, there has been a shift from this, you're a batterer, you're going to jail, you're doing this, to what is going on in your life that we can help you with. And, when you look at that trauma lens, first of all, it blows open a lot of criminal offenses, obviously, but in the domestic field especially, it's very well recognized. So I know that with regards to the supports of the various other agencies within the county and the state, that is something that is very much on their radar and they are trying to address. I know that, for example, Cornerstone does a lot of work with children and making sure they're getting appropriate programming and that they are their needs are being met. And we also include that, the recognition that if there are children present and there are children witnessing this violence, that we are alerted to that through the police report and make appropriate referrals that way as well. So if we find a case that meets the threshold for a CPS referral, for example, we're able to make that. But just being in this community and being in this work, I can tell you that focus is right here. I mean, it is really something that everybody involved in domestic violence recognizes as a need and is working very hard to make sure is addressed properly.
Great, thank you. If I just can say make one last comment here, and I'm so grateful to hear that as somebody who's worked with kids for a really long time, knowing the long-term impacts of complex trauma on children's brains, and how that hardwires their brains and how much work it takes to unwire their brains that way. And as somebody who's going through the foster care licensing process right now, I've realized actually the only people who are being trained on like how to be able to interact with children and support children who are experiencing complex trauma are essentially foster care parents going through that process. And at that point, we're so far downstream that we have a lot of backtracking to do. And so I am a huge supporter of early intervention and figuring out how we can really bring those supports here. When I first got started at the city, the first thing I did was Youth Violence Prevention Executive Committee, and that was when I got to see the data and the stories of very clear connection between, the 16 or the 19-year-old that's now up for their second felony or something like that. If you go back to the very first time that they had interaction with the police, it was between 3 and 5 with a domestic violence call. So, and then again, and then again, and then it's their own turn to interact with the cops. And so when we see that so clearly, and we talk about community violence, we have to understand community violence is connected to violence in the home too. And so just want to throw that out there for my colleagues to take into consideration as we move forward with this work. And thank you all so much.
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll echo the thanks for this work. I know how challenging it is and how important it is, and how often you're navigating sort of contradictory needs and impulses in the community, and, as you try to really support everyone. So thank you, everybody who's engaged in this work. It's actually very helpful, I think, to have the presentations back to back that we just had, because we just kind of talked about, on the one hand, reducing arrests, and then I think on the other hand, needing to respond in domestic violence cases, and understanding that sometimes someone does need to be separated from a situation in order to resolve a conflict in progress, right? And so there's this real tension in the place that we sit with those two ideas, and knowing that we want to reduce exposure. Ultimately, we'd like fewer human beings in cages is one of the goals of our public safety policy, and especially under the conditions of our current county exposure to ICE and the sanctuary city conversation that we've had, but also recognizing that some of these situations need a response. So how are we currently balancing? How do we sort of, if we have sort of good policy guidance around what are the points where we say this really does need an arrest and this really does need charging versus this needs some kind of other intervention? How are we making that determination, or how do we balance the competing and sometimes contradictory factors that go into these cases?
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair and Councilmember Fletcher. And thank you for expressing that tension very clearly, because that's a tension that exists in our work very strongly. Under the statutory guidelines, if officers are called to a location and there is an allegation made that meets the definition of a domestic assault, that meets the criminal offense, they do need to arrest on that offense. As you saw from the information in the hotspots protocol, something that's coded as a domestic, when they get out there, might not be a domestic assault under the statute. It may be a family that's having a crisis. It may be an issue with, many of them were issues with regards to their children. So the decision point very often for the police officers comes fairly straightforwardly. Was there a criminal offense or was there not? And if there's probable cause for a criminal offense for the domestic violence statutes, they do need to arrest. However, once we get these cases, we do take all of this into consideration. We definitely, have a lot of input from the victims, thanks to our wonderful staff. And we also look at each of these cases. And I can tell you, I've been with the city attorney's office for almost 18 years, 8 of those years on the domestic violence team as a frontline prosecutor. And some of the work I've been doing since then has been more focused on community initiatives, treatment courts, and other things that really sort of speak to there are other ways we can approach issues that bring people into the criminal justice system. Now, we always have to be very, very aware of victim safety and family safety and address those issues and follow the statutes surrounding that. There are a lot of statutes surrounding domestic violence cases, what can happen, what needs to happen, and if someone is put on probation, for example, they need to go to programming. So what we are trying to do is look at these cases through the lens of what needs to happen in this particular case, based on the dangerousness of the offense, based on the history, based on victim safety concerns, and trying to figure out the best way forward through our negotiations to make sure that the offender is held accountable, but that we are also, as much as we can with our limited scope, addressing the other issues. So it is a tension that exists, based on the statutes that we have in place now. If, the officers have probable cause for a domestic assault, they need to make an arrest, so.
Councilmember Ellison.
I don't so much have a question, but just wanted to echo what my colleagues were saying, and the appreciation of this work, and how hard it is to how difficult it can be to balance. It's funny, Councilmember Cunningham and I have a long history of working with youth. We're so young ourselves, on one hand, we can't have children exposed to violence. On the other hand, I know in my long history of working with youth, I've never heard folks say like, man, then Child Protection Services stepped in and it really saved, right? Everything was better. Oh man, foster care system really like fixed things for me. So I want to also respect and acknowledge that you guys are dealing with doing really good work, really important work, and navigating some really tricky situations as Councilmember Fletcher illustrated. So just wanted to extend my thank you to you and your team.
Councilmember Cunningham.
I'm actually curious on the CPS aspect of it. How has the work that has been done thus far had impacts on child removal from the home?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Councilmember Cunningham. I do know, because we are more aware now of when there are children present and that are impacted by this, that has increased the referrals we've made. We don't unfortunately know what happens in all of those cases. I know that our victim witness folks work very closely with and have a lot of contacts and outreach and training with CPS. In fact, we just did a training with them about a month or so ago. And, I think that, again, based on the community and based on these committees that I sit on, the Family Violence Coordinating Council being one, we just discussed child protection issues in one of our recent meetings, that there is definitely, again, this, I would say, momentum towards looking at what is the best way to address the underlying issues. And I see the system in general there moving less from the punitive to the supportive. But the fact of the matter is very often if there is significant violence in these homes, these children are at risk. And, we have to let the child protection services do their jobs. But I do know that getting them involved sometimes is, I like to call them points of intervention. Whenever you can have a point of intervention with a family that is in crisis, it's an opportunity to help them. And sometimes that point of intervention is a good motivator to address underlying issues. So, but I am confident in the work that I've seen and with our community partners, that underlying feeling of moving from the punitive to the supportive really seems to go across all of the various community services. So.
And last specific question, but has there been any crossover with the work that the city's doing in reunification efforts as well with CPS?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Councilmember Cunningham. That part of it, we are not as involved with. Unfortunately, we're sort of at the beginning part of the process. One of the things that looking at moving forward is integrating some of these systems, because there are a lot of different court systems. You have the criminal system, you have the family court system, you have the civil system that very often have intersecting functions in the same family. And what is the best way to approach that? I do know that our probation officers are very good at keeping track of that information if they have somebody who they are supervising. And that is one of the things with the domestic violence cases is our probation officers, we have units that are solely supervising domestic violence offenders, and that they are communicating very closely with CPS, so that CPS has all of the appropriate information about the progress that the individual is making in their programming and that things are moving forward. Because very often the requirements of CPS and the requirements on their criminal probation are the same, or at least intersecting. And so I do know that those agencies work very closely together, and quite frankly, the better you do on probation and your programming, the more likely you're looking at reunification.
Well, I just want to say thank you for all of that, and that I very much so look forward to supporting and helping to build this work and fill the gaps and be able to really realize this work to its full potential. I look forward to supporting it.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Do you still have a question? Okay, just checking. All right, so I don't see any more questions or comments, and just wanted to add also that I'm really proud of the work that the City Attorney's Office does. I'm always impressed with the breadth and depth of the work and initiatives that you all do with the community, and always getting grants to, help do certain initiatives. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and we're going to go ahead and receive and file. So all those in favor of receiving and file this presentation, please say aye.
Aye.
And that moves forward without any further business before us. We are adjourned. Thank you.